and it will be available on our website, mgnv.org, in approximately 2 weeks. So if you miss a slide or you miss a reference that you would like to have, you can go to our website and review the presentation. I'd like now to introduce we're lucky to have 2 speakers today. The first is Jasmine De Corsi. She has been a master gardener for a little over 5 years, and her main focus has been food production. And she has spent many hours growing vegetables at the Virginia Cooperative Extension Small Space Garden in Fairlington. As an extension to her interest in gardening, Jasmine is also a novice beekeeper and is learning to be a good steward to wild insects. Her bees help pollinate her vegetable garden. She is also a strong advocate in our group for winter sowing, which she will tell you more about. Pam Newton has been a master gardener since 2018. As an Air Force veteran and avid gardener, Pam loves to help encourage the art of plant stewardship and sustainable agricultural practices. And now we'd like to begin our presentation. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I want to begin by first exuding how much love I have for growing with seeds. There are 3 things that I love about seeds over purchasing seedlings, although seedlings do have their merit. One is seeds are cheap or free. You can buy a seed packet for $5 and under if you want to get super fresh seed, but you can also get free seed from Virginia Cooperative Extension. And that is available to you. There's also more choices with seeds than you would at even a nursery or a big box store. So you can get all kinds of varieties with seeds, and I think that makes it more fun. And lastly, I'm too old to have human babies anymore, but I can always have plant babies. So I've turned my maternal instincts to that, to growing that. Okay, let's move forward. We are members of the Virginia Cooperative Extension, and that is a volunteer organization primarily centering on Alexandria and Arlington. Although we master gardeners come from everywhere, I'm in Fairfax. So since 1985, we provide public services in all types of forms, classes like this. We also have a help desk running each weekday. We have clinics that are outdoor and occur with, what do you call them, food markets. We have various demonstration gardens throughout the area where we show various techniques of growing. And we also include the Arlington Central Library as a place where we have those clinics. If you're ever interested in the organization that supports Virginia Cooperative Extension, that would be the Master Gardeners of Northern Virginia, and their site is there. If you're researching on your own, it's best to get research-based information. And the way to do that is to pick your subject and put :edu or :gov, as opposed to somebody's blog or WordPress. That way that allows you to trust the information more. Okay. All right, so before we get into the meat of what we're talking about here, let's talk about general best practices. Always test your soil, at least every 2 or 3 years. Wait, can I, oh, it's not coming in. Anyway, this is a test kit. And this goes to the Virginia Tech. It goes, and you take a bit of the soil and you tell them what you're planning to grow with it, either flowers or tomatoes or some other type of vegetable, and you mail it. And I believe 2 weeks and $12 later, you stick your check in there too. Then they come up with a report that breaks down what the composition of your soil is and what you need to do in order to make it better. So that, to me, is better than guessing how good your soil is when you throw seeds in it. You always want to make sure that your soil is not compacted and it's not where a lot of people are stepping. And if it is, if that's where you want to grow, you want to aerate it. You might want to consider adding soil additives, either your own compost or compost in a bag. With any plant that you have, it's always right plant, right place. So any failures that I had was either the wrong plant, the wrong place, or some variation. So, and we learn by trial and error, it's all experiment. You want, if you're buying seeds or plants, seedlings, take a look at the little tag that comes on them, because that will tell you what they're resistant to, and that will make your life a little bit easier in knowing what's coming and what that plant might be susceptible to in terms of disease. Another tip is to grow companion planting. It's good to grow smelly things next to your vegetables, because, and when I mean smelly things, I mean herbs. That helps to deter wildlife sometimes, and some bugs. And sometimes it's not even that, it's that it helps the companion plant, like growing carrots next to tomato plants that help aerate the soil for the tomato plant. Over time, you will learn to know what are the good insects and what are the bad. We can, if you have specific questions about bugs, you can post a question about that and I'll try to answer it. There's just so many. And the last thing here is, don't grow the same thing in the same place every year. And I know that sometimes we have such a small space to grow in, it's hard to do that. But you're looking at the insect predation, the soil, nutrition of the soil, and to grow the same thing is just depleting exactly what that plant needs out of the ground. So it's best to rotate them. So as gardeners, this is the toughest part of the year. And this is normally our schedule. And this time of year, this is when we're planning. We're drawing out what we want to grow. We're looking at seed catalogs and getting that together. And we can also begin winter sowing, which is planting, at least in the winter, perennial seeds, outside. And I'll talk more about that. And they don't need to be babied very much, and you can start growing. Okay. So what we're going to talk about today are the growing seeds. We are going to talk about seeds. The growing season in our area, how to get plants, how to select and grow seeds. And when you're growing them, we're going to discuss what do they need and what are the different ways you can grow them. How to acquire, how to manage seedlings if that's what you're dealing with, and various resources that we have to offer at Master Gardeners. In our area, we are USDA Plant Hardiness Zone 7. And that also equates to American Horticultural Society's Heat Zone 6. So we waffle between 7A and 7B, but what that really means is that we have about 26 weeks of a growing season, and our killing frosts end around the latter part of April, and they begin about the latter part or early part of November, the latter part of October rather. But you can extend your season, and that's a completely different talk, into the killing frost season with plants that are tolerant to that type of condition, and you can protect them in order to have food all 4 seasons. And what I'm talking about here are cool season crops that can be planted as soon as the ground thaws, things like peas, things like collards, some lettuces, that can be planted when the soil temperatures are as low as 40 degrees, and they like the cool weather. So these are plants that can be grown early spring and early fall, and can take you into really cold weather or really hot weather. They do not like either if it gets too extreme. For example, cilantro. I love cilantro. Cilantro is a cool weather plant, and it grows great in early spring, but as soon as the heat comes, it bolts and wants to become coriander. So that is one example. We'll provide more in this discussion. Warm season crops we're quite familiar with, the potatoes, the peppers, the tomatoes, just a variety of plants that we know and enjoy in our salads and with our meals. And those really like to be germinated above 50 degrees and really like, just like us, like a day that's 75 degrees. That's a perfect day. I provided a handout with planting calendars that should have been mailed to you. And this is what it looks like. So what you can see on the left-hand side are the various crops and what's the best time to plant them, what's the best time to harvest them, and you can do succession planting, especially with the cool season, like I discussed before, where you can replant them and harvest them into October, early fall. Are there any questions regarding what I've discussed so far?
Jasmine, there have been 2 questions. Someone asked, and this is not anything you've discussed, but could you talk a little bit about storing leftover seeds? And you may want to do that later. And another person mentioned that they plant radish seeds, get nice healthy foliage, and then when they pull up the radishes, there's nothing there. And do you have any advice for them?
Yes. Okay, storing seeds.
I can handle that.
Okay.
So when you're storing seeds from one season to the next, I recommend if they're still in the seed packets, put them in a Ziploc bag and seal it, push as much air out of there as possible, and put them in a cupboard. Like just keep them away from light, moisture, heat, anything like that. I saw your comment. You don't have to store them in the freezer. Some people will store them in the fridge. There are some seeds that may be susceptible. There are some seeds that you do something called stratification, where you freeze them and let them come to room temp again, and then freeze them again. And that's meant to break the outer, to basically stimulate the seed, the growth of the seed. But that's primarily for flowers, like milkweed, echinacea, other seeds like that. You shouldn't have to do that with vegetable seeds, but just keep them in a cool, airtight container in a dark area. Don't play with them. Or you can put them in your fridge. I've never had to put mine in the fridge. I've never done that. And I've never stored seeds in the freezer either. So I hope that helps.
Okay, radishes, which is a cool crop. It can be grown quite soon. You want to make sure with radishes that you have what you call loam, because those are growing underground. Loam is a very soft, fluffy soil. So any type of resistance that that radish is going to meet, it's going to not grow as well. That's for anything that grows underground. You also want to make sure that they're not too close together, because they will inhibit each other. So you won't get a full round radish. So those are a couple of things. Is that it, Colleen?
If you have time, there are a couple more questions that have come in. One is, can you save seed from hybrid plants, and should you? And another is, there were a couple of questions on your plant and harvest calendar. Someone wanted you to elaborate on it a little bit. And also, is there a way that you can use that to tell yourself when to start seeds indoors?
Uh-huh. Okay, you take, Pam, you take the hybrid.
So hybrids are, okay, there's the difference between, okay, I'm sure you've seen heirloom and hybrid. Hybrids are basically brand new variations of plants, and they're not stable. So you're not going to get the same product if you save that seed from your hybrid plant from the previous season to the next. You're not going to have a guarantee that you're going to get the same luscious, amazing tomato that you got from your hybrid seed the year before. There's no guarantee. And chances are you're not going to. Heirloom seeds they've been established, and I believe the minimum consecutive year of consistent produce is 50. It's 50 years. So if you're looking for something where you want to grow something and you want to save the seeds, go after an heirloom. Hybrids, they're typically a lot more resistant to disease. They're a lot more resistant to extreme. They're just a lot more resistant to a lot of things that are, kind of troubling to deal with when you're gardening. But you're not going to get a consistent product with that seed the next season, if that helps.
Thanks, Pam. So here's the planting calendar. And the question was, how early can you start these plants indoors? When you start plants indoors, you want to start, I would say, and Pam can tell me if I'm wrong, maybe 8 to 10 weeks before you want to put it in the ground. Because what you're doing is starting plants indoors is you're mimicking a summer's day inside of your house, and while it's freezing cold outside. So you can prepare your seedlings that way if you have the correct lighting and soil temperature and nutrition, but you're also going to need to acclimate those seedlings to the outdoors per this plant calendar, when they can be placed into the ground.
Right. So I always start my your heat-loving plants, like your eggplants, tomatoes, your peppers. I always start those about minimum 8 weeks before I'm ready to put them outside. And I'll usually start those the same time, roughly the same time that I start my other like lettuces, like zucchinis, stuff like that. That stuff doesn't take a lot to really get going. And in my opinion, it's easier to transplant smaller seedlings of those plants. Your tomatoes, your peppers, and your eggplants, they really need to be established before you put them outside. And I usually, just because the weather's been so wonky over the past couple of years, I usually wait until middle of May, end of May to put those out. I like them nice and full and ready to go when I put them in the ground. So if that answers.
Yes. So plant types. When Pam and I were in class, we learned all about how plants are separated by their Latin names. And that includes criteria that includes the length of their life, their family of plants, the community they grow best in, and various breeding methods for those plants. So one of the things that I learned at first when I was gardening was the difference between annual and perennial and biennial. So annual are most of your warm veg and your flowers, and perennials are some vegetable that grow leaves the first year and veg the second. Perennials are also a lot of things that will come back year after year. So I put some examples of various things that will come back that are, excuse me, food related in the perennial list. I'm not as good as some master gardeners might be, and to the various plant families that things grow in, but what this is good for, and there's a link here, is knowing what goes well with what grows, what can you grow next to something else that's not going to inhibit the growth. And you can find a lot of that information online. Can I grow my onions next to my peppers? That type of thing. So it's good to know in that way what plant family what you want to grow is. Okay, I think I already mentioned this, but the benefits of companion planting. And you really can take a lot of work off of yourself if you know this well. There's a book called Carrots Love Tomatoes. I'm sure there are others. And these tell you all about the various plantings that will keep bad bugs away, that will keep various critters down. I mean, if a small critter is hungry, I'm sure that they'll just put up with absolutely anything. But you can inhibit, you can make your life easier if you know what that companion planting is. And there is a resource where you can find that. Okay, Pam.
Sorry, technical difficulties. Yes.
Can you take it from here, please?
Yep. Okay, so the difference between open pollinated versus hybrid. So we touched a little bit on hybrids. So it's crossing the two different species of a plant, and it's done it's done purposely to get basically the most bang for your buck, like to give you a really good product for that growing season. But the problem is that it's not stable. So hybrids are pollinated purposely. Open pollinated means that that's basically nature taking its course. It's you've got your pollinators jumping from one bloom to the next, and that's how you get like more stable varieties. And then again, the heirloom, those are your ones they're open pollinated via nature progression and whatnot, and they're a lot more stable. And like I said, heirloom, you think your grandma's heirloom, they're typically 50 years or older to establish that ranking. Okay, next slide.
Did you want to see if there were any questions?
Oh yes, any questions?
There was one question. Could you possibly put the link for the companion planting in the chat?
Yes, I will.
Okay, that's all we have so far. Oh, wait,
Okay.
here's a late breaking. Oh, someone asked to please put all the links in the chat.
Okay.
Okay.
Also, I might add, you can go on to mgmb.org, and there is a ton of information on there. You can just do a search for any question you have, and I guarantee you're going to find an article on it. Also, and this is a little further down in the slides, if you do site, SITE, colon edu, you put your topic, you put that, that'll give you links to a lot of universities where there's a ton of information. So if we can't answer your question here today, then there's right at your fingertips. So All right, so obtaining
And
plants.
someone asked if you could show the previous slide. That one, yes. I think they want to get the link.
Oh, okay.
Oh, man,
Good luck.
that's a, that's a long one.
I would,
We'll put that in the chat.
yeah,
Okay,
I just can't do that while I'm presenting. So
right.
that's the challenge.
there was
Okay,
also a
good.
question about propagating leeks, or how do leeks work?
Propagating leaves.
Leeks, L-E-E-K-S.
Oh, leeks.
Yes.
You know, I haven't had any success with leeks. I think we did we try leeks in our, go ahead.
I have had success with leeks, and they were fun to grow. I started them out as seeds, and I transplanted them, and I up-potted them first, and I put them. I waited till they got pencil size, and then I transplanted them into the ground and spaced them apart, and I had a fantastic crop of leeks. So my only experience is growing them from seed, and I don't know if anyone else has had experience with propagating them any other way, but that's it.
Okay. All right, so ways to obtain plants. There are numerous ways to obtain plants. You can start from seed. You can go purchase them from, you know, a nursery or a big box store. Don't recommend. It really depends on, there's a lot of factors you need to take into consideration. If you're going to start seeds indoors, do you have the space? Do you have what you need? Growing indoors is labor intensive. And it's time consuming, and it does take up a lot of space, and you have to be mindful of your basically plant sitting. So if you've got free time, if you're retired, if you've got the large enough space and you've got the budget to go out and get the equipment that you need, by all means, start from seed. But like, as Jasmine is going to go on later in the presentation, there's winter sowing. And I'll let, if you have an outdoor space, which I'm in a condo, I don't have, like, I have like a front yard, and I'm not technically allowed to grow food in my front yard. I do it in pots. But it really depends on, like, what's your budget, how much room do you have, when do you want to start, your time commitment, your preferences. Sometimes, you know, some people just don't like, you know, taking the time to really grow from seed. But next slide. Okay, vegetative propagation. All right, there's lots of plants love to live and they love to spread. So simple layering, that's where you have, oh, hang on, let me get my new notes. Like your strawberries, they send out runners. They love to grow. You know, if you plant one strawberry plant in your garden bed, give it a year or two, and you've got that full portion of your garden bed full of strawberries. So I hope that you like strawberries. Personally, for me, strawberries, I keep them in pots so I can contain them. There's advantageous buds. So this is a seed potato. I get my potatoes from an organic grocer, so they don't have the restrictive thing sprayed on them. So you'll see, if you can, where's my camera? There's my camera. So when you've got spuds on your buds, those, that just came out. It's the lack of coffee. I just gave up coffee, people, so I might say some weird stuff. I might be hallucinating. So these are advantageous buds. So if you've got potatoes that are getting ready to turn, save them. The easiest thing that I found to grow are potatoes. And I've had pretty decent success with them. I've been using recently potato bags. They're cloth bags. They're cloth, and then there's some like plasticky material that you can get. You can get them on Amazon, or I've heard of people using all different methods to grow potatoes. But so at this point, at the beginning of the planting season, I'm going to take this guy, I'm going to put it in my window because I want to encourage these spuds. I want to encourage these to grow. When they get large enough, right before I plant them, I will cut the potato in a quarter. Like, you want to give about 1-inch pieces. for each, like, a section of the spuds, and leave them in your window to basically condition for about a week. And then you can take them and throw them in the ground. So any kind of like seed potatoes. I've done this with blue potatoes, the fancy purple potatoes, all sorts of stuff. Another example of an advantageous bud is ginger. So if you got ginger sitting in your I hope you guys can see that. If you've got ginger sitting in your cabinet for too long, you see this guy, that's an advantageous bud. So same thing with the potato. I'm going to put this guy in the windowsill a couple weeks out before I'm ready to plant. I'm going to start, like, wherever I see a bud, I'll break it off like that and just leave it in the window, let it condition, throw it in the ground. We've had a lot of success with doing ginger each year. So you can also, let's see. I think that's in another slide. Go to the next slide. Yep. I almost went ahead of it again. All right. So slips. I don't have an example of this year, unfortunately, but when you've got sweet potatoes that are sitting in your cabinet and they start to grow little, leaves on them, you can take those slips. They're called slips. You can break them off and you can put them in water, just a glass of water, and let them start to root. Once you have a pretty decent root system and growth, then you can take those and direct sow them in the ground. Or you can, like, if you want to start getting them inside, like going, before the season, getting them inside, put them in a pot. Herbs. I always, like, if I have store-bought herbs that are getting ready to turn and I want to save them, you can take some herbs, you can put them in water, and you can let the root system develop. With some herbs like thyme, rosemary, you want to make sure that the portion that you save is green, that it's not like the fully developed woody stem base of the herb, because you're not going to be able to develop roots from that. It's got to be the green part. So that's another way you can get plants. Garlic. I usually have garlic that's sprouting green because I buy so much of it and I can't use it quick enough. I've been on top of it this year. So garlic, you can take your bulb if it's turned and you start getting those little green sprouts on it. You can take these guys, throw them in the ground. So, and always put your pointy point up. That's where you're going to branch. And I don't have a good onion example this year, but an onion. So if you've got too many onions, I'm obviously getting better at using my supplies at home. If you've got an onion and it's been sitting there a little bit too long and it's starting to, get that green sprout coming out of the tip of it, save that, throw it in the ground. Another great way to just, there's tons of things you can do to start plants. So, all right, seed selecting.
Any questions?
Oh, yep.
There were a couple of questions on potatoes. One, what do you use as a planting substrate? And two, is it okay to use store-bought potatoes for this process?
This one is store-bought, but like I said, I go to typically if you go to a farmer's market or if you go to an organic grocer, your potatoes are going to naturally start to develop a spud on it. There's an inhibitor, I think, sprayed on some potatoes that you will get from like the big box, like Safeway, Giant, stuff like that. So I get my potatoes from Mom's or I get them from a farmer's market. So if you want to try this with a potato, go to one of the smaller grocers or go to a farmer's market and just hold on to it, leave it on your counter for a couple of weeks. And then when it starts to do this, put it in the window. So, all right. And then there was another question?
What kind of soil?
Soil. When I do it in my, my little like cloth bags, I just use normal potting soil. I've seen people do a mix of compost and straw. Like I've heard of all sorts of things, but I've had great success just using potting soil. So just the thing with gardening, especially with your, like when you're growing food, starting your own seeds, really getting into it, the key is experimentation. Like we have like basic guidelines you can follow, but also like just play around, because a lot of the stuff that I know now is from me basically, oh, let's see if this works. And if it doesn't work, we'll move on to the next thing. And then the things that have worked, I've cataloged in my head and, all right, so next slide.
There were several questions about planting onions and how exactly to do it. There was another question about winter sowing, whether you could use, say, a Jiffy pot and put the seeds in the Jiffy pot in the container. And a third question about how do you all protect young seedlings when you first put them out?
Okay, a lot of this stuff, like I said, is going to be covered later on in the slides. Onions, once it gets that green sprout at the end of it, I throw it in the ground. I leave it. I put the base all the way down. I usually let it get about this high so that I can bury the base and just let it grow. I've had pretty decent success with this. Other people might tell you to bury it further down. I just bury it enough to where the soil comes up probably to the base of the stem. Does that help?
Yeah, I did notice on the slide, Pam, that by seed, onions are only good for a year.
A year, right.
Right. I think the same is with corn, but I'll let you talk about
know.
that.
I think it's onion and corn. I think there's a couple others. I can't remember.
Okay.
Okay. All right. How to select seeds. Okay. So there's a lot of things you need to take into consideration. What's your growing space? How big is the plant going to get? What zone are you in? You want to make sure you get plants that are going to thrive in your temperature zone. What kind of soil are you working with? Like in Virginia, we have a lot of clay. Like unless you've got a bed that you've been working on and doing amendments with, you've got to see what you have. You have to see what you have to work with. Microclimates. Is your growing space, does it face north or south? Are you near the river? Are you in like the middle of the city? Like, does it get really, really hot in your space? Do you have shade? Is it direct sun? So there's lots of things you need to take into consideration. Are you working with a raised bed? Are you working with, I had a garden plot, but I gave it up this year because I'm relocating. So this year I'm going to attempt to grow what I can in pots. I've successfully done tomatoes and peppers in my pots out front my condo, and I have to hide them in the back so my condo association doesn't see them because technically I can't grow food. But what's your motivation for growing? Are you doing it to teach your kids how to grow? That's how I got into it. My parents were avid gardeners as I was growing up. My dad does all his own pickling and they're crazy. And so I'm a little crazy and I want to pass the crazy on to my kids. So by growing our own vegetables, my kids eat all their vegetables raw. Like they're like, Mom, don't cook the green beans. They'll take a bowl of green beans and just snack on them. Like, so is it to have fun? Is it to be social? Garden plots, there's a lot of social stuff out there that happens, What's your motivation? Are you concerned about food scarcity? That could be another driving factor these days.
Or the cost of groceries.
And the cost of groceries. Oh my good Lord. Yeah. So you want to learn about the varieties that are going to grow well in your climate and well in your space, because you want to give your plants enough space to really mature and grow. Are you looking to do a bunch of tomato canning? Do you want to make a lot of marinara sauce? Then yeah, get a couple tomato plants. Go crazy. I noticed that people will plant a whole lot of tomato plants, and then they're giving tomatoes off, at the end of the season because they don't know what to do with them. So just be, mindful of like, how much do you really need? What kind of pests do we have in the area? What diseases, like what fungal diseases are prominent in your particular area in the soil? Freshness and storage conditions. We went over that. So when you're storing your seeds, keep them in an airtight container. Keep them dark, basically away from anything that's going to like promote like either growth or mold, heat, light, and moisture. So I've had seed packets for about 5 years that I've been able to get viable seeds out of, but that's just because I don't like to throw any seeds away. I'm a little crazy. But typically the shelf life is going to be, depends on the variety, anywhere between 1 to 5 years. I've seen people get plants from seeds that were 10 years old. So
It's true.
It really depends. So just because it's seed packet, like, so our seeds that we get donated over at Burlington are typically expired. They're a year past their expiration date, and they're all viable. So if you've got seed packets that expired last year, do not throw them away, save them, okay? All right, next slide. All right, seed catalogs. They're number one, they have really pretty pictures of the mature plants, so you know what you're looking for when you're growing your seeds. They provide excellent sources for information. Sometimes like the better seed catalogs will give you a history of the plant. It'll obviously give you where it's best grown, the best conditions for it, a little information on the produce it will provide, how to save the seeds. And some catalogs are like, I'm not going to go get a catalog from Home Depot to look at seeds. So I typically get my seed catalogs from Southern Seed Exchange and from Seed Savers. Those are two awesome catalogs to get. And right now they're backlogged. So if you want to order a catalog for this season, get on it. So, and they're free. So next one. All right, your seed packets. You're going to get all the information you need. So you see on here, like it shows you the different like zones in the country, and it'll show you the months like of when it's optimal in that zone to plant that seed. And all of this is talking like, this is, now remember, like most seeds, they can't go in the ground until after the last frost. And one reason why I started inside sowing was because it was so unpredictable. Like I'd go and I'd throw some seeds in the ground in my plot, and then lo and behold, they break ground, they're getting established, and then we have another freeze and they're toast. So that's why I start inside. It gives you the information like what depth do you have to plant it, the spacing, how big is the mature plant going to be? So you don't want to plant seedlings side by side by side by side by side, because you're not giving the, like if you're not giving the plant enough room to actually grow, you're going to restrict it. My mom used to go like, oh, I love my mom. She used to go and she would do rows for parsnips, and she would sprinkle like the whole packet in one row. And I'm like, oh. So we had microgreens, parsnip microgreens that season, and not actual parsnips. So just be mindful of everything that's on the packet, like how much space, how much depth, when to plant it. And it gives you a breakdown of like, okay, once it's planted, days to germination, 7 to 10 days of germination. So if you're like 2 weeks, 3, 4 weeks into it and you're not getting any germination, that seed was not viable. So you got to replant it and get a different pack and replant it. The depth, and then it gives you like, if this one for cilantro, you can preserve, you can like preserve by drying, you can dry the seed, and then you can save it for the next year. Okay, next slide. Okay, tomatoes. So tomatoes, there's two types. There's what we call determinate and indeterminate. And if you're growing in pots in a small space, I would recommend that you look for, in some tomato, I actually used all my tomato seed last year. Some tomato packets, not all of them, some tomato packets will have on there determinate or indeterminate. So the difference, your determinate tomatoes are your bush tomatoes, typically your cherry tomatoes, your grape tomatoes, and the plant is determined to grow to a specific size. Like it's not going to be like an indeterminate tomato plant, are those ones that like you've got stakes surrounding them, hoops holding, supporting them because they just go nuts. And they've got the suckers and they just want to keep going and going and going and going. I mean, if it's hot weather, it's hot and humid and you got a lot of rain, they are just going nuts. They are indeterminate because they're not really sure when they want to stop growing. They'll stop growing when the frost kills them. Other than that, they're just going to keep going and producing. So, determinate, I am determined to grow to this size. And you can put me in a pot. Indeterminate, Give me the space I need because I'm about to explode. All right, next slide. We also have seed packets that are trilingual. In this case, it's still going to give you the same information, just different measurements in the metric system. So when you get one of these packets, and we do have these over at the Fairlington Community Center, it's still the same information. You just got to figure out the measurements by doing the conversion. And it gives you all the same information, it's just a different presentation. All right.
Any
Growing
questions?
questions?
There was a question about what do you use for starting seeds, either potting soil or seed starting medium?
We're going to get into that. For starting seeds inside, I use seed starter just because the soil isn't as dense as potting soil. It's light and airy and fluffy. Or you can use, last year I used coconut cork. They come in those compressed blocks that you can get. And one of those blocks will expand to, I don't know how many it was you. It was, oh my gosh, I had so much of it last year. You just got to pre-moisten it and then let it sit, and then you got to heat it up. And anyways, it's a process, but okay.
There was another question from a flower grower who likes to deadhead the plants and wants to know how you can tell if the seeds are mature enough to save and use.
Jasmine, you're
Okay.
much better at flowers.
You can't deadhead if you want seeds. I understand you want to deadhead because you want to promote more flowers. But in order to collect seed, you're going to need to let that go ahead and bolt and let it die and become the seed pod. And as you collect seed from plants, you'll notice on various plants that they have different way of presenting seeds. Like there's something called, I don't know the right name for it, wood rose. And it's slow going to the ground, and it produces seeds in little silver cups. It's very sweet. And then there's others that make, I have a vinca that makes really small pea pods that allow it to do that. So those seed pods come directly from the expired flower. I hope I was able to answer your question.
And here's a final tough one. Someone tried to start lettuce indoors. It germinated, grew 2 to 4 true leaves, and then stopped growing and has been tiny for a month. What are they doing wrong? They watered it, fertilized it, grew in a 50-50 potting soil mix and seed starting mix, and grew it under lights.
What kind of lights were they using?
Just said grow lights.
Grow lights. Did it say daylight? When you bought the grow lights, did it say daylight?
Didn't say.
Okay. When you use grow lights, and like I said, a lot of this stuff we'll touch on in the next slides. You want to look for lights that specifically say daylight. There's a lot of lights out on the market, and I'm not going to go into the lumens and the Kelvin, but look for daylight, specifically daylight. So were you watering when you have seeds, when you're starting seeds indoors, you have to water from the bottom. If you're watering from the top, it's giving it too much opportunity to develop like fungus or mold. So always water from the bottom. Also, you have to have a heat source. Like when you're sprouting, you have to have heat source. But my condo, I live in a condo that's like from like 1940 something, and it's no insulation and it's frigid, hence my shawl. So when I'm sprouting indoors, typically you don't need to have a heat source available for the plants once they've sprouted, but I keep my heat source going through the whole period and, until it's warm enough until I can open my windows in my house and it's like a decent temperature. So there's all sorts of things that could be going on with that. So, all right. Germination basics. Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. All right. Conditions for germination. Light, moisture, temperature, and oxygen. So that's like when you're storing your seeds, That's why I say put it in an airtight container, away from moisture, away from heat, away from light, because those are all the things that are going to promote the seed to want to, get going. And if you're not ready to throw it in the ground and you want to keep it dormant, you got to remove all those factors. So light, go back to the other slide really quick. So light, when you're germinating, you don't necessarily need to have the light, but once the germination process begins, you need to have a source of light. Moisture, when you're starting inside, you always have to water from the bottom. If you don't have if you don't have a tray to keep to like water, like if you've got the things starting inside and you've got the cell packs, they're perforated on the bottom, so you have a tray, typically you sit those in and it soaks up the water from the bottom. If you don't have that, you can take a little spray bottle and just spray the surface until it germinates. But always water from the bottom. Temperature, look on your seed packs to like, and the chart, go ahead and go to the next chart, sorry. So optimal temperatures for germination, the soil temperature. So you'll see our cold loving ones right up at the top here, beets, carrots, lettuce, parsley, radishes, spinach. Those can handle a huge span of temperatures. Whereas like towards the bottom, we have like our tomatoes, eggplant, okra, stuff like that. Those really, really need warm temperatures. So especially if you're sprouting inside, if you're in a cooler environment, keep your heat source going. So next slide.
This is me. Okay, there's a couple of ways that you can start. One way that you can grow that we're not covering here is hydroponics. That's the next area I'd like to learn about. But what I'm going to be talking about here is direct sowing and winter sowing and sowing indoors prior to the growing season. So what you, again, it's all about the soil. So I'm going to assume that this lady here has tested her soil and made sure that she had good organic matter and it was at the right pH in order to grow the seeds that she wants. You want to make sure that you're looking at the packet at the depth of the seed. Some seeds like light to germinate. Some seeds need to be buried the amount that they are. So if it's a big seed, they want to go down into the soil that deep. But the back of the packet should stay. This replacing skips speaks to if you have a bad seed in the bunch and it doesn't germinate, then you stick what is hopefully a viable seed in that spot. And thinning, when you have things that are too close together, and then you decide one has to go, and you cut it or you pull it or you transplant it. When you're looking at direct sowing, you're looking at what the exposure is of that plot. So I worked at a demonstration garden where I saw birds coming in and trying to steal the seeds that were planted. So some people, they start growing outdoors, but they put covers on them of various type. In order to germinate outdoors, these things have to be babied. So you have to constantly make sure the soil is moist. You know, it's going to depend on the temperature and the moistness of the soil. And then the babies come and you have to worry about slugs saying thank you for all your small baby plants. They were delicious. So the care is more for direct sowing when it's exposed to the world. And we'll talk about other ways too. Here's my favorite way, winter sowing. Now, you see those cans there? None of the tops are on. On a sunny day, it gets 20 degrees warmer in that jug than it is outside. And what you're essentially doing is we're talking about making a small greenhouse early so that you can start your plants early. Okay. Generally, you can start winter sowing 1 month before the seed packet says you can sow it outside. Most of the time. You have, and I'll provide some criteria for that. It really depends on whether or not it's a perennial or an annual or something called a tender perennial, just how sensitive this plant is. It doesn't require the babying that direct sowing and indoor planting does. You essentially, you put them out, the tops are off, and you just check on them every once in a while. You peek in from the bottom, I mean, not the bottom, the top, and you see whether or not you have little babies growing inside. And the birds and the slugs are not gonna have as easy access as they would if they were unprotected. Growing like this also means that you don't have to harden plants, which when you grow plants indoors, you have to get them used to the outside. So indoor plants, you put them out for an hour, you bring them back in. You put it out for 2 hours, whatever your technique is for hardening the plants. For winter sowing, you don't need any of that. Inside those milk jugs, it's only the strong will survive. So those suckers are going to be the ones that you want to keep are going to be strong, healthy plants. Let me see if I missed anything. Oh, and because the temperature fluctuates in there so dramatically, they're also, you know, that's why you don't need that hardening. It's because they've already accustomed to the rise and fall of the temperatures. What do you need? Okay. You can use a lot of containers. My favorite container is a gallon milk jug, but you may not, in your family, maybe you don't drink that much milk and can't commit to that. So you can use, you know, juice or soda. What are they? 2 quarts soda things. The most real estate you're going to get is in a milk jug. Okay. Let me see what else. You can use foil roasting pans with clear lids and salad boxes, but you're going to want to think about height, how tall your plant's going to get in there, because you're going to have to keep more of an eye on it if it's going to be a foil roasting pan with a top on it, because they'll get tall and you'll need to, you know, expose them earlier. So what it takes at the bottom of these plants is 3 inches of soil, which is, I don't know, just about 3 fingers. And I'm going to use a milk jug to explain this. You rinse out the milk jug. You do not need to, you do not need to put bleach in there. You know, it's all good. So you take a milk jug, you cut around the side, you leave the handle as a hinge. You put holes in the bottom. You put at least 3 inches of soil at the bottom and you soak it. And at that point, you put the seed in. And how much seed do you use? Well, that depends on a couple of factors. One, how old is your seed? The seed that we use, which is, you know, at least 1 to 2 year seed, may not have as high a germination rate as seed packets that you bought directly from southern states or something. So, so if I was going to buy, if I had new seeds, I'd put less seed in there because I was more confident that I'd have plant or germination from those. If I have older seed, then I overseed because I know that I won't have as many plants to grow out of them. You definitely want to keep the cap off the milk jug or the cap off, because you want to let the air transpiration, that the fluctuation of temperature and moisture inside that little greenhouse you've made, to be able to have access to the air and not get too hot. Okay, I do not use seed starter, but seed starter is best. I like seed starter, don't get me wrong, but it's expensive, you know, so I have made my own seed starter by taking vermiculite and what's that other thing, Pam? I forget, it's the little white kernels. Anyway, I can't remember the name. You can make your own seed starter, or you can just use a really good potting soil. What's important here is you're not using the dirt from the outside. Never, ever do that, because the dirt from the outside has weed seeds and everything else. So unless you're going to pre-prepare your soil that you're taking from the outside, and, you know, pouring boiling water over it, or putting it in the oven and stinking up the house, or you're going to want to start with sterile soil. And I recommend a low end, cheap, Vigara, that's a brand that's pretty cheap for potting soil. All right, here's the key: what to grow when. If you were going to start now with winter sowing, you could sow on hardy perennial flowers that require what Pam mentioned earlier, stratification. And those are seeds that require, they say they require refrigeration, or that way you can sow them in the container, put it outside, and it will naturally freeze and thaw and freeze and thaw. Okay. You can also start planting, if you're feeling brave, frost tolerant vegetables. It'll be slow growing, but those will grow with because what you're essentially doing is making a very small microcosm environment for these seeds to grow. In February and early March, most of your things like your herbs are good to grow, and your frost tolerant vegetables, those cool, you know, the cilantro. But there are definitely seeds that you do not want to winter sow, and I'll talk about that in just a second. Once you get into the March and April timeframe, this is the risky area, because you don't know whether or not there's going to be frost that night or not. So you're going to need to watch the weather. So if I'm sowing squash in late March, early April in my jug, then I'm going to make sure that if it's going to frost that night, that I bring them indoors or throw a blanket on them, because they're not going to make it. So, but what I like most about winter sowing is essentially I'm creating my own nursery. When it gets warm enough, I open up my winter sowing jug. It's already been labeled on the inside and out. And essentially, I don't need to go anywhere but my own backyard to fill up my grow beds. But some seeds, as I mentioned before, are not good for winter sowing. Peas are not good. Those are nitrogen fixing, and they do not like to be transplanted. Some plants don't like their roots touched. Don't touch my roots. Okay, so once you start messing with their roots, they just want to fall over and give up the ghosts. There are also taproot vegetables that aren't good, like parsnip or carrot, because if you winter sow any taprooted and you try to transplant it with a sole taproot, you're never going to get a straight carrot. Not that you would anyway, but you're never going to get hopefully a you're always going to get sideways ones, or, it just makes life hard. Don't winter sow taprooted vegetables. My mother has had great success transplanting chard. I have not, but so it really depends on the sensitivity of the plant. And as you learn, some are better than others. Are there any questions thus far?
There are lots of questions about winter sowing. One, what do you do about sun? Do you put them in direct sun, indirect sun?
I put them in fold apart sun because it is a winter sun that I'm putting them out into. The sun goes lower on horizon and isn't as intense. So yes, I put them in full sun depart sun. I'm also keeping in mind that it gets 20 degrees warmer on the inside of my container.
Okay.
So, and don't let them dry out.
Well, that
So-
speaks to another question. Do you have to water them?
Sometimes. I do watch it, but it doesn't require me. I mean, I could go on vacation and leave my winter sow containers outdoors. I wouldn't feel as confident if I was growing them indoors and taking a vacation. So what was in the other part of that that question, Colleen?
No, I think you answered it, but I have another question. Do you take the plastic top off if you use a foil container?
I do once they've, yes. Or I would poke holes. So this picture you're seeing here is
Mhm.
not my winter sowing, it's somebody else's. So as Pam and I mentioned, gardening is an experiment. So what I would be concerned with is that it would get too warm in these containers here. And there's no chance for them to access the air. So I would protect them with the cover, but I would definitely put holes in them so they could, get some ventilation.
Okay. There were lots.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
drying out. You asked me about. There's two ways. You can lay them in a pot or something and let them soak it up from the bottom. They're not going to dry it out as readily in the winter. Or you can just give them tough love and pretend it's a torrential rainstorm and just water them from the top. That's the way nature does it. So just make sure it doesn't completely dry out.
Okay, there were lots of questions about the substrate. What potting soil? How do you choose it? Can you use Jiffy Pots? Do you know of any place that can deliver potting soil or garden soil in bulk so they don't have to use plastic bags? Lots of questions about what to plant in and what are the options.
I like planting in potting soil because it's sterile. And if I see any growth, it's going to be what I put in there, not the weeds. So I actually don't know of any bulk sellers, but I can appreciate the consideration to the earth in the plastic. I purchased mine in plastic, and I get the cheapest one, which the brand is Vigara, but I would ask a nursery or, when I think about places that deliver, I don't think they deliver potting soil. I think they deliver compost and
Yeah, compost and leaf mulch.
wood chips and.
Mhm.
But I don't know any potting soil, but if someone finds one, wow.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I would recommend like, talking to the smaller independent nurseries. Pardon me, they may have a better lead on it. I wouldn't bother going to Home Depot or Lowe's or any like of the big box stores, because they're not, I don't see them investing the money to do a program like that. But check out some of your the smaller mom and pop nurseries. You may be able to find a source. So, and to add, is it Perlite, the other component of the seed starting that you were looking at?
I think it was, and we had 4 or 5 people chime in with that.
Yeah, so there's perlite, vermiculite. You can use peat moss or coconut peat. I would do the coconut, the big blocks that you can buy that expand when you add water. That stuff is super cheap and it goes a long way. So
Yeah, to make your soil lighter, because
Yeah.
that's what your seeds want. The babies want light soil.
Okay. There have been a couple of comments that the seed distribution link does not work. Can you put it back in when you send out a follow-up to this talk?
Yes, I will.
Okay,
And I
thank you.
apologize.
And at what point do you move the plants out of your container?
Great segue. Let's move right into that.
can I
Okay.
add, somebody had a quick question about Jiffy Pots. Are they, if you're talking about the Jiffy, the little core things that you can get that
Yes, I
expand
think
the
so.
water, those,
Uh-huh.
that's coconut core. So you could take a bunch of those, and feed some water to them, but I would add the vermiculite and the perlite, and just to, it's already going to be really fluffy, but you want to add a little more to it. So I've done the cores before, but they're hit or miss. So, okay, next.
Sorry, final question. Someone asked twice, if they're using a raised bed for this process, what kind of soil should they put?
Garden soil.
Okay, thank you.
And you could probably, I'm not sure if you can get that in bulk. But if I was going to have a raised bed, I would fill it with garden soil and amend it with organic material. I make my own compost from the leaves that fall from my trees, and I put that in there also. But back to transplanting, you want to make sure before you transplant that your little baby plants have what they call 1 or 2 sets of true leaves. So the bottom picture here is cilantro, and the little flat leaves, the round ones, those are baby leaves. The true ones are the ones that have the little spokes, okay? That's when you know that it's going to be viable and isn't too small to not make it once you've transplanted. So let me show you a friend of mine who has a giving garden that who grows vegetables and gives them to the poor. So on your left is 1 jug of spinach. And you can see that she really didn't space it very often, very far apart, but she filled her bed with teeny tiny little spinach plants, and she was able to fill her entire bed with spinach. So, I mean, talk about economical. This is pennies on the dollar for growing food. This is another example of, this looks like it's collard greens. And you can, I mean, it's incredible to think that this on the upper left-hand corner that you start out with just those plants in there, and you can see they're not perfectly spaced, to transplanting them and growing them to full maturity, how much food you can get out of a single jug. And this is just another example. Now, some people are more organized than others with their winter sowing. My friend Catherine has a scientific mind, and she wants to have all the details. So she wrote what was planted, what type of plant they were, where it was planted, what So personally, when I winter sow, I say I'm more like, I have 4 jugs of this particular plant, and that way I know I don't need any more. But I don't, it depends on how fastidious you want to be as to your record keeping, or whether you do it at all. So, you know, the mother of winter sowing is Trudy Davidoff. And she came up with this wonderful way. And here are some various resources that you can use to get more information on winter sowing. I definitely recommend trying it. You will have the first plants on the block. And it feels good when you look inside those jugs and you see those little baby plants and everything else around you is dead and dormant. It's just a fun way to grow. Pam, take it from here, please.
All right, so we're going to get into my field of expertise, inside growing methods. So next slide. Okay, the thing with doing this inside, there's considerations. As soon as I have a space where I can do winter sowing, that's what I'm doing, because it's a lot more convenient, a lot less messy, and a lot less expensive. So you're going to need containers, your potting soil, like you can make your own, like the vermiculite, the cork, the coconut cork, the vermiculite, the perlite, perlite. but that would be another mess if you're working inside. Or you can buy your potting, your seed starting. And like with starting inside, I do recommend using like either the pre-made seed starting stuff, just because it's light and airy. Don't use potting soil. It's just way too dense. You're going to need a heat source. You're going to need a light source. You're going to make sure you have to water. And if you can't start unless you have seeds, so of course you got to start with seeds. You're going to need fertilizer. When I'm starting inside, I usually use fish emulsion. And you're going to need trays. You're going to need a shelving unit. You're going to need space. So there's lots of things to take into consideration. A timer for your lights. If you're not diligent about turning on and off the lights for your plants, you got to have a timer. So there's just a lot of things to take into consideration if you're going to start inside. But some, like with space limitations and outdoor space confinements, like sometimes it's the only option you have. So starting seeds indoors, you have to do it several weeks. Like I said earlier, for my tomatoes, eggplants, my peppers, my real heat loving plants, I start those about 8, sometimes even 10 weeks ahead, just because I'm anxious to start planting. And, you know, it's nothing like having, you know, baby plants growing in your house in the dead of winter, because you're just like, I need outside. So that's it brightens your spirits. So that's a benefit of doing things inside. Your cool weather loving stuff, you can start those like 4 to 6 weeks ahead of the planting date on the package, just to get them established. Those are going to be a lot more tolerant to temperature fluctuations when you plant them outside. And like I said, in this area here, my tomatoes, eggplants, and peppers, I don't put them out until the middle of May, until I have a guarantee that we're not going to get another frost, and it's not going to drop below a certain temperature. Your herbs and your flowers, you want to start early as well. I haven't had a lot of success growing herbs inside. They grow and grow, and then if we have a continued long spell of cool weather, or, you know, potential freezes, like they tend to like not want to be in containers for too long. So the timing with that's something I'm playing around with, but just be cautious of that. Next slide. Containers and medium. Okay, so I do the plastic cells. I don't have any with me right now. I've already packed them up. You can do the plastic cells. They sell kits at like garden centers. You can buy them online. and they have the base tray, the watering tray, then they have the cells that you can insert, and then they have a dome that you can put over to basically create your own mini greenhouse. There's also other ways that you can make your own. You can use toilet paper rolls, like that image in the bottom left-hand corner. The handy little like metal thing in the middle of the photo, you can actually take soil and you can compress it and make your own. Egg cartons, I know somebody referenced egg cartons. You can do egg cartons. You can save your clam shells with the tops just to create that greenhouse effect until they start to germinate. You can save like yogurt containers. There's all sorts of things that you can use. You can use newspaper. The wooden tool over here is I've never done that. I guess you wet newspaper and you compress it and go ahead.
It doesn't have to be wet.
Doesn't have to be wet. Okay.
No, it just needs to wrap around and you fold in the bottoms and you compress it so that it becomes a flat bottom. And
Awesome.
then it comes out like a little cup, little,
Awesome.
So talk about good recycling.
Definitely. You can get the compostable little seedling pots. Although I don't recommend those because you can only use them once. They're typically kind of expensive. And when you put the seedlings in the ground, you actually have to break, like I've had to break the pots apart because the roots won't grow past that barrier. I know they're supposed to be compostable, but they take longer to decompose than your plant is going to have for its growing season. So just be cautious of that. So there's lots of different things that you can do if you're looking at saving money, and I know everyone is now, to get this going inside. If you're gonna use like any container type things that you've salvaged from like the yogurt cups or something like that, make sure you poke holes in the bottom because you want to be able to provide drainage because you don't want root rot with your seedlings when you're starting inside. Let's see, next slide. Heat and light. So I do have a couple examples. I do have the heating pad. These things are awesome, especially like I said, my condo has like no insulation. So these are a definite have. You have to have these to get the seeds going. Unless you're living in a tropical climate, I don't know. I haven't tried to start things in a tropical climate, but maybe you wouldn't need these as much. But in this area, you definitely need a heat source to get the plants growing. Remember the things that cause seeds to wanna grow and sprout: your heat, moisture, light, and air. This example in the photo is, this is a prefab growing station that you can get, and they're typically, they're pretty space efficient. You've got different shelves that you can grow on, and you have the ability to raise and lower the light. But typically these will cost you a pretty penny. I think
There's
I
some
looked
DIY there, isn't there?
Is that a DIY one?
Yeah.
Oh
so
yeah,
that's
there's a DIY one in there. There's lots of things you can do. The one image you can do, didn't we tried this for one of our classes, didn't we?
Yeah. So in that one, it looks like they got LED light strips off of, say, Amazon, cut a hole at the bottom for ventilation and started their seed tray under it. I think that ours has foil already on the inside so that we made that light would bounce off of all sides.
That's right. But the row kit there, that I checked on Amazon, those are like a couple $100. That one is probably like between $300 and $400, but like a couple years ago, I wouldn't know how much it would cost now. But what I did is I went and I got like just a basic shelf, like a 5-tiered shelf off Amazon. I got 5 tiers so I could I hung my grow lights. I got like ones that were like, the shelves were graded so I could hang my grow lights and adjust the height of my grow lights as the plants developed. And I think the shelf cost me maybe $60. I just had to have a space for it. So I typically kept it up in my upstairs hallway, kind of out of the way. I mean, there's ways to do this inside. You just got to be savvy about it. So I bought the heating pads individually. And then I got my light source, like when you're getting grow lights. So this is my grow light. This is, has daylight value. It is an LED. And what you want to make sure when you get lights, make sure that you get these shields with the light, because that's going to help focus the light directly on the plant when they're young. And if I remember how to put this on. I don't have my glasses on, so this is a challenge. Anyways, okay, so when they're on, your shields are like this, so they can direct the light better. And as the plants have matured and gotten bigger, especially if I'm growing in, like, I think it's like some cells are like 70, you get 72 cells in one of those little plats. So you got a lot of babies growing. So when they start getting bigger, I need to expand the light source. So I'll take the light shields off. So I think all together between the lights, the heating, the cells that I have, and I save those every year. Do not throw them away. You can rinse them out at the end of the year with a bleach solution and dry them out. The reason why you want to, like, the difference between using the milk jugs and not having to use a bleach solution for the milk jugs is because it's been an organic product in there. With plant babies and their cells, each year, say like the year before, I had an issue with fungus or something. You want to remove the ability for that thing to sprout up again. So always sanitize anything you're using inside. All right. Next slide. Oh, with the heat source, once your plants have sprouted and they're established, you can remove the heat source. But like I said, for some of my stuff, I keep the heat source going at all times, like with my heat loving plants, simply because my space is just, it's drafty and not so insulated. So like I said, you've got to take into consideration all of the things going on in your space. All right. And a timer for your lights. I don't use a timer because I am up every single day at 5 o'clock and I go to bed around 11. You want to give your plant babies anywhere between 14 and 18 hours of light each day. And if you're not like prior military, so I'm in that, no matter how late I stay up, I'm always up at 5. So if you're not like me and you can just wake up without an alarm, which is scary, get a timer. All right, next slide. All right, so watering, when we're watering, you want to water from the bottom. This image in the upper left-hand corner, that's from somebody that was watering from the top. Oh, wait, no, I'm looking, I don't have my glasses on. So when you're growing inside and if you're watering from the top or you're not letting your cells drain, you will get like a white powdery stuff that starts to develop on the top of the soil. Your stuff is toast, like your plant's toast. So you want your soil to be moist, but not saturated. When you water from the bottom, if you've got the thing that all your cells sit in, your tray, I lift up an edge of the cell in the corner, I add water. And any water that is not absorbed within 20 minutes, I take that tray and I dump the excess water. So you've got to pay attention, because if you let your plant sit there and just keep soaking it up and soaking it up and soaking it up and soaking it up, it's going to be too much water. You're going to get root rot. Also, I didn't mention when you're growing, when you're sprouting initially, you got to have, most kits will sell like a clear dome that sits on top of those cells. Make sure you get one of those, because that's going to create your little mini greenhouse effect. But once they break the surface, you have to remove that, because if you got the heat source on the bottom and you've got the thing on the top, you're constantly creating humidity and condensation. So if you don't remove that top, if you keep the heat source on the bottom, you got to remove the top. And you gotta remove it regardless, because you gotta give your babies space to grow. So once they're sprouted, get that top off of there. But it does help speed up the process of getting them to sprout in the beginning. Fertilizing, I usually fertilize. I don't fertilize my stuff that I keep inside for maybe 4 weeks. I usually get those out in the ground, like my cold loving stuff, like the brassica. I don't bother fertilizing those, but I will fertilize my peppers, tomatoes, eggplants, heat loving vegetables, because I have to keep those inside longer. And at some point there, I want them to get big and bulky and lush before I put them out, because that way I know they're going to survive. So I will up pot those. For those particular plants, I'll put them in a 6-inch pot and still keep them under the heat source, depending on like how my apartment is, and keep the light source going. Always keep the light source going. I've seen when I started, I tried to start sprouting on my dining room table because I have a big window next to it. And like I said, doing things inside there's a learning curve to it, and you've got to see what works best for you. But when I started, before I was part of the Master Gardeners, I didn't know about having a heat source. I just put things in soil and put them next to my window and was like, grow, baby, grow. And they would, but they would get really tall and spindly, and they looked like very unhealthy, like weren't sure what they were doing, kind of little things. It was really sad. So when you've got your light source, you want to make sure you keep it about 2 to 4 inches above your plant. And as that plant grows, you want to raise that light source. All right, next slide.
Questions?
Question, what's the problem if you have tall, spindly plants?
They're fighting for that source of light. So
They're weak.
They're weak. So the reason why, so you get the full spectrum outside, but you're not going to get enough light unless you have like a dedicated greenhouse that has full access to light constantly. You're not going to be able to simulate real, like decent growing conditions. So that's why you have to have a light source. I tried a couple of seasons without a light source, doing the window thing, and I never got the results that I got when I actually put my grow kit together, my growing station together. So they're already in abnormal like conditions to grow because they're not outside, and plants are meant to be outside. So you got to give them what they really, really need. So if you can try, but if you do window light for your seedlings, you got to make sure you rotate them so they're not growing like sideways over here trying to reach the light. But it's not optimal. I don't recommend like doing tabletop or windowsill, because you're just not going to get the same results that you will if you actually have indoor lighting systems set up.
Okay, thank you. Pam, I know you mentioned that you shouldn't use fertilizer for at least the first 6 weeks. If you have plants longer than that, is there
Yes.
something you use?
I use 50% dilution of fish emulsion.
Okay.
Mhm.
Someone else asked, they had grown peas, I believe in the milk jug containers, which successfully grew a vine, but then the peas turned yellow. Do you have any comments about that?
Jasmine, what would you think?
Well, peas is one of my plants that I don't winter sow, only because of sensitivity of the roots. But the yellowing could be a ton of things.
Lack of nutrients. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I was initially thinking, is like the soil doesn't have enough nutrients in it. So.
Okay.
Oh, and one thing I also forgot to mention, there's a lot of information, sorry, people. When you're growing inside, you can't just take your plants and put them outside. You have to do what we call hardening off. And I know Jasmine had touched on it briefly. So when your plants are ready to go outside, even though people are like, but it's sun and they're going to love the sun, right? But when you're living inside, think for yourself, when you're living inside under artificial lighting through the winter, and you spend one full day out in the sun, you're gonna burn. Same with your plants. Treat your plants like they're really your babies. You're not gonna take your toddler and throw them outside on the first sunny day of the year with no sunblock, right? Okay, so start with an hour a day, keep them in the tray, take them outside, leave them out for about an hour just to get accustomed to it. The next day, do 2 hours. The next day, 2.5, 3. Keep an eye on how they're handling it. You'll be able to see the sunburn because they'll get brown spots, like real burnt looking brown spots on their leaves. I usually take about a 10-day period to harden my plants off before I actually move them outside. And when you actually do plant them in the ground, make sure your soil is ready. So get your amendments in there, aerate the soil, do what you got to do. Don't just take them out like you haven't done anything with your soil to get them ready. And make sure it's a cloudless or a cloudy, windless day. That way they're not as exposed to like high winds, bright sun. You want to make sure you offer a little more protection for them outside. So just check, the weather and see what day of the week is going to look best for you to get them outside. All right, next slide.
Couple more questions. Are there any vegetables you would start right now indoors?
My heat loving ones, definitely. Like I said, I'd like to give those 8 to 10 weeks because I want them really established when I put them out, because we're not in the super hot, humid environment in May. We may still have days where it's dropped down to this, 40s and 50s at night. So make sure they're like really, really healthy and strong before you put them outside.
All right.
Pam, I agree with you. That's we're looking at the fruit of the eggplant and the tomato, and I don't want to wait till August and September. I want I want it in July or maybe even June. And that's why growing indoors or buying seedlings beforehand will probably get you your food sooner. Sorry, Colleen, you were saying
That's
something?
okay, Pam. Would you recommend buying a heat mat with a timer and with a temperature control?
Yes, I would definitely go for the temperature control. If it has a timer already with it, that's fantastic. Absolutely. Like I said, I don't use timers just because I'm up at a specific time every single day. And even if I stay up later, I cut my lights off at a specific time at night. So if you're not as diligent about it, then definitely get a timer.
And how long would you leave the heat mat on?
It depends on your environment. Like I said, for my house, it's always chilly. So I keep the heat mat going. For my lettuces and my brassica and stuff, I get those out after, once they're sprouted and they're established. I get those out maybe 4 to 6 weeks after I started inside. And that's usually, it's still kind of cool. So I personally leave my heat mat on. But like I said, if you do that, make sure you're on it with checking the moisture level in your soil. With my tomatoes and my heat loving ones, I keep my mat on constantly.
Okay.
So.
Have you ever noticed tomato leaves turning purple when started under lights?
I've had some varieties do that, but they turn green pretty quick.
Okay. All right, that's it for the questions. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, special considerations for growing seeds in the fall. All right, next slide. So the cool thing about having a setup inside is because you can do continuous planting and you can have babies continuously ready to go on the ground. So with some of our cooler loving crops, it's a good idea. You've got to take into consideration, they're going to thrive in the cooler weather, but sometimes our summers go way longer and they're too unpredictable now. And if you're growing cool weather plants at the end of summer, it could potentially be too hot for them to really get going until sometimes October. A couple of years ago, we had a 90-degree day in October or something. So for seeding inside, for sprouting inside, it's optimal because I can control my temperature here and I can control when I put them out. So that's another reason why I do inside. When you're doing cold weather plants, if you're going to direct sow them, make sure they're in a shaded part of your garden. Make sure they have protection, because if they're sprouting and you do have another random 90-degree day in October, it's not going to make it. So that's one thing there's a couple factors you got to take into consideration. All right, next slide. Outside sources. All right. I will not buy at the end of season because you see those poor guys on the shelves. They probably didn't look really healthy to begin with. That's why they're still there. So when you get them home, they're probably going to have some kind of disease. They're definitely going to be root bound. They probably haven't even been hardened off because they're in a store or they're in like a shaded area. So if you buy stuff like this, you're going to have to make sure you harden them off just like your seedlings at the beginning of the season. The big box stores, they don't really maintain their stuff. I don't know if they have plant loving people on staff. I hope they do. Sorry, talking too much. But just be cautious about buying stuff from a box store.
Okay, take a sip.
Oh, thank you. Okay. So thinning out. This is the hardest part for me with growing inside, because I feel like I'm a plant murderer when I have to do this. So last year I had my kid do it because I couldn't do it. But when you start growing inside, you want to put more than one seed in your cell. You want to put a couple, especially depending on how old that seed is. And you want to give them the opportunity to sprout and grow a little bit. And then you want to thin them out to give the strongest, basically the strongest plant a better opportunity to survive and thrive. So when you're thinning out, don't pull them out. You have to cut them. If you pull them out, you could have 3 little babies growing together. If you pull them out, you're going to disrupt the root system of the one that you want to keep, and it could kill it. So clip them, and that root system will just decompose in the soil. Always look for your healthiest. I mean, and you all know what a healthy plant looks like. Let's see. Next slide. Oh, and brownies, I'm sorry. So brownies, if you're growing in a lot, like I typically don't have to worry about this because I do like 3 seeds in a cell and I pick the best one and I clip it and I'm done. So I got 1 plant per cell. But if you're planting in a larger container and you've got numerous seeds, what you can do is you can pull that chunk of dirt out and you can break the patches apart. You may have numerous plants in one. That, like, if you're pulling apart a brownie, you pull a little bit off each time to eat it. You don't shove a whole brownie in your mouth. That's why we call it brownie. That's my interpretation anyways. That I have to use visuals. So you can, like with winter sowing, when you're breaking open the jug and you're pulling all that stuff out, you're pulling out brownie pieces. And when you actually plant them, the strongest ones are going to survive. So next slide. So up potting, like I said, with my cold loving plants, I typically don't take the time to up pot them because I'm ready to put them out in the ground by the time they're ready to go, when they look like they're established and they're healthy. I will up pot my heat loving plants because I want them, your plant needs to be as high as it is wide. So you want full and bushy. You don't want tall and stringy. They're not going to do well outside. Full and bushy. So I will give those guys more space for their roots to really spread out. Oh, I already touched on this. Hardening off. Sorry, I thought I missed these slides. I'm like, where's my slides? So hardening off, the process of like just gradually bringing them outside, trying not to kill them and sunburn them. And I've done 10 days, and 10 days has worked really well for me. Says up to 14 days. Just see, you've got it like you're babysitting a plant toddler. Just pay attention. Next slide. Okay, tips for successful planting. Like I said, amend your soil. Do that as soon as you can get out there and the soil is no longer frozen. Get out there and start getting your soil ready for your seedlings. Get your amendments. I use, what I'll do is like, I do it at the end of the growing season. The year prior, I will take leaf mulch and I will turn leaf mulch into my soil to give it the winter to kind of break down and add nutrients to the soil. You can also do cover crops. I don't think we touch on that here. You can do cover crops at the end of the season, like clover, alfalfa, I think is one that you can use. There's a couple. So you let those grow over the winter. And at the beginning of the growing season, they'll die off. And you just basically take that material and you just turn it. You get a shovel and you just go out there and turn it into the soil. And that's going to add a lot of really awesome organic material to your soil to help with your plants during the growing season. You want to make sure you know where you're planting things. Like Jasmine touched on earlier, companion planting, what's going to go next to what? Spacing. Make sure you give your plants, once they're in the ground, enough space to grow. Depth. Look at those seed plants. During the season, what I'll do is like, I'll write a list of everything that I've got growing and I'll write exactly, I'll say like depth 6 inches, 4 inches, whatever spacing. So I write out a chart for myself so that when I'm out in my garden, I can look at it for a quick reference. If your seedlings are root bound, break up, like when you pull them out of the cells or the pots, see it like if all you see is roots and you don't see any soil, they're root bound. So you gotta just gently loosen the soil and kind of let those roots fall and break apart, and then you can plant it. If you plant it root bound, you're limiting the growth and it's probably just gonna die anyways. So, because it's gonna be so used to just being so tight, it's not gonna know that it's got room to spread. All right, next steps. So like we touched on earlier, mgnv.org is a fantastic research. Doing the site, SITE, edu. That's like whenever if you have a topic you're looking up a specific plant or growing methods or stuff, do put that in there. And that will give you a lot of links to extension agents from across the country. Really good information. It's not those blogs online like I tried this and it worked, which is some of them are fine, but if you want to get serious about really producing vegetables and really having a good garden, always go to the reputable sources. Garden fearlessly. I would say for me, I garden haphazardly. So just however you garden, just do it. You don't know until you get out there and get your hands in the soil. But once you start gardening, you will discover that it is just an absolute, like it's kind of become an obsession. But, and it's a great way to get out there and meet people in your community. So, all right, next slide. I think this is an old image of our web, of our page. But you'll see there's all sorts of stuff that you can find. I mean, this is like an amazing source of information. So any question that we didn't catch or that we didn't answer today, go on mgnv.org. I guarantee you're going to be able to find your answer there. And we also have tons of classes all the time. Okay, next slide. Questions?
There was only one final question about whether you should add phosphorus to tomato starts if you see the purple leaves.
I haven't. My purple leaves cleared up pretty quick. Jasmine, would you recommend that?
I've not done that either. But Colleen?
No, I've not done it either.
Didn't we, like I know a couple years ago we had a tomato specific class.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So look and see our listings of classes, online teaching classes. There may be, because tomatoes are so popular. Boy, you may find another class that will have the class that I sat through was, oh my, like I had like 20 pages of notes. It was a ton of information. So just look up for that class. I'm pretty sure if we don't have one this year, there should be a recording of another one.
Okay. That's it for questions. Just lots of thanks for a great presentation. And you've inspired a lot of people to start their planting now.
Awesome.
And they, everyone says they learned a lot and they really appreciate it. So thank you both. This was great.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye.
We'll follow up with updated links.
Awesome.